Hello everyone and welcome. I am E.T. Agarwal and I have been associated with Tax Mantra for over 8 years down the line, specializing in Singapore corporate law side of things. I've had extreme pleasure of working in Tax Mantra with various clients across different sectors, helping them navigate through various complex regulatory compliances and helping them stay compliant as well as financially efficient. So, today I'm really excited to share with you one of the most critical yet often overlooked aspect of startup fundraising, which is the important clauses of SHA and your term sheets that the founders tend to overlook. So my topic today and the presentation in which I'm going to deep dive is 10 clauses that can make or break your startup deal. And actually, this topic is built upon our deep experience of over 750 startups, helping various startups or various companies raise nearly 20 billion in cumulative valuations across India, US, UK, Singapore, and the UAE in Tax Mantra. So let's move ahead in this matter. Now, when you are in a startup ecosystem, and when you are in ecosystem in which the startups are raising funds, so as founders, we are often focused on growth, on traction, on building our product market. But when it comes to negotiating the term sheets or shareholders agreement, we actually miss the hidden traps, the clauses that can erode your equity or even make you exit from your company as well. So, my dear friends, this session is not only just about theoretical aspect, it's actually quite relevant from practical aspect. And we will also help you to understand these terms, these clauses with case studies as well. That has actually we've been through these case studies on our practical basis. We've found the tested strategies and by which we've been able to save companies from giving away too much yet too early. So let's start one by one. And the first clause that I would like to cover is the preemptive clause. So what is actually the preemptive rights? The preemptive clause actually gives the existing investors the right to participate in future rounds in order to maintain their ownership stake in the company. So if a company is about to bring an investment of say for 10% equity, it is going to give raise new investment. So, by virtue of preemptive rights, these 10% stake shall, on pro rata basis, it should be allocated to the investors first. So, they will have to give the right to investors primarily before giving to the new investors to buy these shares. If the investors gives their consent to buy these shares, then the company will have to and will mandatorily have to give the new investment to the investors only, or investors and the founders, whatever the case is. If the investors decline, then the offer is made to the new shareholders. So on the surface, you may seem that this is quite fair. After all, existing investors are actually giving and getting an opportunity to protect their stake in this company. However, there's a catch. What catch is there? Now, this clause can actually block the company to bring in new strategic investors in the company. So when these new strategic investors does not come in the company, so there sometimes a significant value addition by virtue of these new investors, it gets blocked. So as a founder, it is really important to negotiate and to carve out or to manage the expectations of the company and to manage the expectations of the investors out of this clause only. So you will have to make sure that you bring in strategic investments, you expand your ESOPs without any restrictions. This will actually help you be flexible. This will help you grow your network, especially in later rounds. And when this will help a lot in scaling the business aspect. So preemptive right actually plays an important role. However, the founders will also have to see how they can manage the investors as well as the company's expectations when drafting this clause. The next clause that we would like to discuss is ROFR, which is right of first refusal. Now, if you see ROFR and if you see preemptive right on on the share aspect, you might feel that both of these are similar in nature. Yes, to an extent they are similar. However, ROFR is actually applicable when an existing shareholder, which can be a founder or an investor, when they want to move out, when they want to sell their stake, they transfer their stake in the company to any third party, then this right of first refusal comes into picture. Now, how they comes into picture? This clause will actually give the investors or say founders, if the investors are moving out of the company or if the founders are moving out of the company, this will actually give a right to match any third party offer for your shares before the shares can be sold to someone else. Now, say for example, if the investors want to move out of the company and they have negotiated all the deal terms, everything has been finalized with a third party, by virtue of right of first refusal, the investors, they will actually have to first offer the shares under the same terms and conditions to the founders. If the founders do not agree, and vice versa, the founders are not, if the founders are moving out of the company for some stake, if they are selling some stake in the company, they will first offer to the investors and then the third party. If the investors decline, the third parties can come into picture and they can take the shares. Now the crux is what whoever is moving out of the company, selling their stakes in the company, and when by virtue of ROFR, when the shares are being offered to the other party, the terms and condition, it should not be less favorable than what has been offered to third parties. So this is the important crux that should be followed and maintained while moving for ROFR or when using or drafting clauses for ROFR. So when now, if you see from a founder's perspective, this can actually be a bit of headache. It can delay the sale of shares. It can restrict ability to exit or bring in new partners. So you can actually, what you can do in such case is that you can put in a time limit wherein if under a certain time period, say 15 days, if there is no answer from any from the party selling the shares, then the offer will be termed to have been declined and it will go to the third party. So as a founder, you will always have to be clear about the timelines. You will have to make sure that it doesn't interfere with your ability to move quickly whenever needed. So this is how important and carefully right of first refusal should be drafted. Moving forward, the next clause that we will actually discuss is the reserved matters. So reserved matters, they are actually decisions that the investors, that will actually require investors approval. Now, why reserved matters has been put into a shareholders agreement? If you see, in most of the cases, investors, they take a minority percentage of the company only, and most of the percentage of the shareholder, the majority, say 75-80, in many cases 75-80% is actually held by the promoters only. I'm talking about a an early stage investing in this case. So most of the times, the promoters tend to hold 70 or 80% stake in the company. Now, when the promoter is holding 80% stake in the company, all the decisions will naturally pass. Say if it's an ordinary resolution or a special resolution, whatever it is, the company will pass it easily. The promoters will among themselves pass it, and they would not need investors' consent. Thus, in such cases, to put a hold into the major decisions, the investors, what they do, they, upon occurrence of certain event or upon certain matters, they reserve those matters for their mandatory approval. If the mandatory approval of the investor is not received for such matters, then those matters will not be considered to have been approved, and the company cannot move ahead with these without the approval of the investors. So common reserve matters, what it includes key executives, it includes entrenchment of articles or constitutions, it includes hiding of any KMP, increasing the authorized share capital, issuing new shares, change of business model of the company. So all these important events are actually put under reserve matters where mandatory approval of the investors will be required. Now let's understand this with a case study. Now, to illustrate the examples of reserve matter, we are moving with a case study. Now, imagine there's a startup where the promoters, they hold 78% equity, investors are holding 22% stake in the company. But investors, they have veto on certain key decisions. Now, despite the majority ownership of the founders, the investors, they have the power to block the resolutions like the sale of the company or strategic shifts or increase in the authorized share capital, as I have already discussed. Now, the presence of these clauses, what they do, this will help the investors to mandatorily vote on these matters and approve such important events of the company. This will help the investors to be aware and participate in the events of the company, and even while holding minority stake in the company. So that is why affirmative voting matters, they are considered quite an important right of the investors. So this is how veto rights can create power imbalances and slow down decision making as well. As a founder, you will have to understand the dynamics and negotiate them carefully in your shareholders agreement. Always consider, being a founder, you should consider how much control you're willing to give up, and how this could impact your future decisions of the company, your future operations of the company, what powers you should allocate under reserve matter, which will not impact your day-to-day operations or which will not hamper you in moving forward precisely. So this was the reserve matters, and moving forward, the next clause that we are going to discuss is board rights and voting control. So what is the board right? The board of a company is actually the governing body that will set the strategic direction of the company. It will decide how the company is moving, when to take investment, when is company well equipped, when the company is in want of some funds, when the company is ready to raise funds, when the company doesn't require, when the company is in a position to buy back its shares. So all the strategic decisions the strategic direction of the company is actually run through the board. So it's actually essential to have at least one board seat reserved for the founder. If the founder reserves a board seat in the company, this will ensure that the founder's vision is actually represented and the business plan is actually implemented and the company moves in the direction as per the founder's vision. So when a founder is having a board seat, they will also be able to have a voice in their major decisions of the company. So this is how a board seat, having a board seat amongst the founder is absolute important. Another key point is the tribe breakers. Now, sometimes board members, they might come into a deadlock, and which could actually lead to paralysis. Now, in this case, what happens? SHA, it contains terms that in case of any deadlock, certain person's vote will be considered to have been to help remove the such deadlock. In most of the cases, chairman actually gets this deadlock vote, and in case of any deadlock, chairman's vote will be considered to resolve the matters. So from founder's perspective, it is actually smart to include independent or neutral board seats to break these deadlocks. So as a founder, you should be actually be aware of super voting shares, any clauses that gives the investors any outsized voting power. So if you are not aware, and if you are not carefully drafting your board rights or voting control, this could actually strip you being a founder. Even if being a founder, you can actually be stripped out of decision making authority that you need to have to move your company, or to strategically move your business operations in the company. So as a founder, you must look into it and carefully draft these clauses. The next point that we are going to discuss is liquidation preference. Now, if you're discussing liquidation preference determines actually the order in which the stakeholders, they are going to get funds at the time, or in the event of an exit, or in the event the company is getting liquidated, or the company is going under IPO, or strategic sale, merger, amalgamation. All these there. So there is actually a section of liquidity event that will be considered. On occurrence of such event, liquidity will be considered, and liquidation preference will accordingly come into picture. These are contained and part in the SHA. Now, so once liquidation preference, if you're talking about liquidation preference, it actually determines the order in which the stakeholders are going to get their are going to get paid in the event of occurrence of an exit. So investors with liquidation preference, they actually, what happens is they are getting paid before the common shareholders, such as founders or employees who have been offered shares under ESOPs. So this is how liquidation preference work. Now there are types of liquidation preference according to which the payment scenarios in the occurrence of liquidity event works. So if it's a non-participating liquidation or non-participating preference, then it ensures that investors actually receive only their original investment before profits are distributed. Now, if it is a participating liquidation preference, then it will allow investors to get their original investment plus a share of the remaining profit. So now, say if your investor we will actually discuss this later in a case scenario. So while actually these liquidation preference, it protects investors, it can limit your upside as a founder. Now, founder should always beware, and we understand that what are they going to give in the in occurrence of liquidity event, and what preference the investors are getting, so that the founders are actually creating a balance between the investors protection as well as protecting the founders interest as well. As I've said, let's discuss this and understand how liquidation preference work from a case study. So, say for example, there is a 20 million exit scenario, and the investor actually investor actually it raised a 10 million investment from an investor. So in case when there is no liquidation preference, then if the investor is holding 30% in the company, it is going to get 20 million. And the common shareholders are, it is going to get 6 million, and the common shareholders are going to get the remaining 20 minus 6, 40 million shares. Now, if there is a 1x participating preference, then the entire capital, that is 10 million from the involved, whatever the investor invested in the company, investor is going to get 10 million, and the remaining 10 million will be distributed among the common shareholders. Now, if the investor is investing in 1x participating preference, then the investor are going to get, first they're going to get their participating preference, their investment amount, which is of 10 million, and then they're going to get the participation preference as well. That is, out of the remaining portion, the investor will get its percentage of 30% as well. So he will actually get 30% of 10 million is 3 million. The investor is also going to get 10 plus 3, which is 13 million. And the remaining shareholder is going to get 7 million. So this case will actually illustrate how critical liquidation preference can be. If you are giving a non-participating no liquidation preference, then the investor is only getting 30% of the total proceeds. If it is making it a 1x non-participating, then it is only getting its investment amount. But if it is getting 1x and participating liquidation preference, in that case the investor is actually getting back his investment funds as well as a portion of the remaining shareholders as well. So this is how liquidation preference is impacting it. It will directly impact your payout at exit, and founders should carefully negotiate liquidation preference so that they are not actually left with disproportion of disproportionate value of shares at the time of exit. So this is how liquidation preference creates an impact, and we should actually be quite you can say diligent in drafting this clause. The next clause that we're going to discuss is drag along and tag along rights. Now, drag and tag, these clauses actually dictates who get to sell the shares in the event of an acquisition. Say drag along, actually it helps majority shareholders, typically the investors, to force the minority shareholders, including the founders, to sell the shares on the same terms. Now, drag along actually is it should be carefully, and it should be carefully negotiated so that the investors actually, so that the founders, actually they do not have to part ways from the company even if they do not want. So drag along is very important, and in most of the cases the founders are actually able to negotiate it, and they reduce the impact of drag along rights. Say they put a limitation cap, or sometimes they actually do not put drag along in their agreements as well. So drag along has to be carefully drafted. On the other hand, if you're discussing about tag along rights, tag along actually protects the minority shareholders by allowing them to tag along and sell their shares when the majority shareholders are going around. So this is actually protective clause for the investors, and investors definitely take this tag along rights with them. In the case majority shareholders are moving out of the company, founders, if the founders are only moving out of the company, then what will the investors do? So in such case, what investors actually do is that they keep their rights with themselves. They keep this tag along rights with themselves, and when the founders are moving out, they also move out with the founders, and the person buying the shares, they will actually have to buy the shares of the founder on the same terms and conditions as they were buying the shares of the founders. So the third party will have to buy the investors shares as well as the founders shares as well. Moving forward, we have to discuss an important clause, which is anti-dilution clause. So when anti-dilution actually comes into picture, they come into picture in case of down rounds, when the company is raising fund at a valuation which is lower than the previous round. So a full ratchet anti-dilution clause, it will adjust the price of your new shares, lower the price, which will be very tough on the founders as it drastically will reduce the ownership. Now, a weighted average anti-dilution clause, it is actually quite fair clause, and it will take into account both the price and the number of shares that has been issued. So as a founder, you should always go and you should always prefer for weighted average clauses. Limit dilution wherever possible. This will ensure your equity is protected even in challenging times. So to since anti-dilution has a widespread impact on the SHA, we have tried to explain this via a case law that we actually encountered in one of our clients' SHA. Now, what happened is that here the pre-money valuation of the company, basis on the pre-money valuation of the company, the investor actually subscribed to some 800,000 convertible securities at a price of INR 100. Now, after this total investment came in, the investment actually, after some time, the valuation of the company, it got declined, and the company, it proposed to issue some new 500k shares at a price of 50, at a price of rupees 50. So if you see, there is a 50% decline in the valuation of the company. So how anti-dilution will protect in this scenario is that the investor, the SHA, it contained for broad-based weighted average method to reduce the dilution impact compared to a full ratio. So what method dilution, broad-based weighted average anti-dilution protection, what factors they considered? It considered valuation at which original investment was made. It considered what is the amount to be raised in the down round, and what was the new shares raised, what was the shares issued at that point of time. After considering all these factors, a revised conversion price was determined, and based on that, the investors' shares, the earlier investor shares, it was reduced. It was increased. It was increased by some 98, 99k shares. So this example actually highlights the importance of negotiate the right kind of anti-dilution clauses, one that will offer protection for the investor and will also allow you to retain reasonable amount of equity. This is how anti-dilution actually comes around and actually helps you through. The next clause that we are going to discuss is exit timelines and buyback triggers. So actually the investors in an SHA, they make a time span of them that they are going to stay for a minimum period of this year, and after that, if the investors want, they can exit from the company, and the founders, they will actually have to provide for viable route for the investors to exit from the company. So when the exit scenario comes, what and how these are actually favorable and these help is that these clause, they can actually pressure the founders to exit earlier, or they can actually create pressure on the founders to make the investor exit from the company. So, see, if there is a internal rate of return buybacks, it can force you to buy back shares, or often at a steep price, and it can actually then drain company resources. They can help you. They can force you to buy back shares. The investors can tell you to help them sell the shares to any third party. So for any strategic exit, the founders have to be really diligent on what they're putting into the clause. So the founders, they should negotiate the timelines. It should give flexibility to make decision based on the company's performance rather than investor pressure. So you should avoid any kind of mandatory buyback clauses or any implications that might have in your that might actually be a personal guarantee and be financially burdensome. So this is how you should look into it. Now, the next clause that we are going to discuss is reps and warranties. So, now what is reps and warranties? Reps and warranties are actually legally binding promises about current company's current status. So, say for example, if a company, they will actually give warranty that it is legally bounded and it holds a good legal standing. The company is not under any kind of notice. There is no case drawn upon the company. In case any kind of warranty is required, say for IP, if any warranty is required, then these warranties actually come under reps and warranties. And if there is any kind of false representation, then there is severe legal consequences, and including any indemnification will also come into picture. And they might actually, if any false representation and warranties have been made, it can actually be a deal breaker, or it can create a substantial delay in your deal closing. So if you are making a reps, if you are putting some clauses in reps and warranties, you should always make a proper due diligence. Ensure that whatever you have put in the in reps and warranties, it should be accurate, and you should update them if circumstances change before the closing, or if there is any change, you should immediately inform your investors and make changes accordingly in your agreements. The next clause that we are going to discuss is founders vesting, clawbacks, and protection equity. So founders equity actually, it gives a kind of comfort to the investors that the founders will be associated with the company for these number of days or months, or a period specific. So this clause actually, this founder vesting, it spreads for typically say a 3 to 4 year down the line. There can be a lock-in period as well. So vesting actually, how this founders vesting, it works in India and Singapore, is in the form of lock-in. So actually, the shares, when issued from Singapore or Indian perspective, Companies Act perspective, when the shares are issued, it actually gets vested. So in order to give an impact of the founders vesting in Indian and Singapore SHAs, what we actually do is we put a lock-in clause. So the founders shares gets locked in for n number of years, and after then it gets periodical release. So this is how the lock-in things work. Say for example, founders shares have been locked in for 4 years, and for periodical release, it is going to release, say, a monthly release or a quarterly release or half yearly release. A certain percentage will be given out, and substantially those shares will get released, and the investors can only part ways from the release percentage of their shares only. Whatever the percentage of shares are locked in, investors cannot touch them. This is how lock-in provision works. So it actually, it will allow the company to reclaim. If the investors are leaving early, this will help you to negotiate a good leaver or bad leaver provisions as well, so that the investor actually don't lose any kind of, they are not in losing stage. If the founders are willing to exit, they will be able to bind the founders through the existence of this clause. So these are actually the 10 main clauses that we have discussed. So there are certain more clauses as well. that actually survives the termination as well. So certain clauses, it survives the termination even after a deal is ending, and this actually gives a complete protection to the investors. Say an indemnification, a non-compete or confidentiality clause. So in case there is occurrence of certain event in which at a time when investor was part of the company, however, once the investor exited after a certain period of time, the event which occurred during the investors' presence, it came out later after the investors' exit. So in such cases, this indemnification clause, it will actually protect the investor even if it is not part of the shareholders. So there's shareholders agreement. So this is how these clause works. It's crucial to understand the long-term implications. The founders, to protect themselves, they should always negotiate for favorable exit terms. They should understand that they don't unnecessarily tie themselves to obligations that will hinder their future opportunities. So as a founder, as an investor, both of you should actually carefully look into these clauses so that there is no long-term implications and then there is no long-term impact of these clauses. At TMG, what we have done over these years, we have navigated, we've drafted various agreements for various clients, helped them raise millions and millions of funds. We've specialized in stress testing term sheets to identify the hidden risk, negotiate best possible solutions and best possible terms that will suit your startup. We've drafted agreement customized to the needs of the investors and the startups. We have negotiated the term sheet on behalf, both on behalf of the investors and on behalf of the founders as well. So we have helped in dealing terms, taking into consideration the growth strategy and taking into consideration on how to scale the businesses from deal structuring to due diligence. We offer end-to-end support to ensure that your investment agreements work both for you and for your founders as well. Ladies and gentlemen, in case do you need any kind of such help in drafting your term sheets or help in drafting your investment agreement, negotiating on behalf of you or your investors, we are always there for you. You can come to us and then we will accordingly help you take your investment in proper way. Signing off. This is me, Iti Agarwal. I thank you and would like to sign off here. Thank you.